Imagine a world where no nation prepares for war. No cities are built to be destroyed. No human genius is spent learning how to kill faster. Right now, nearly $20 trillion every year is spent managing violence, not building a better future. So what happens if that stops? What if humanity finally chooses true world peace? And more importantly, what would that actually change? While you are at it, please click like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment below. What true world peace really means and why it's never existed. When most people hear the phrase world peace, they imagine something simple. No wars, no bombs, no armies fighting over borders. But true world peace is far more than the absence of war. A world can technically be at peace while millions live in fear, while inequality grows, while violence is outsourced, hidden, or normalized. True world peace means something much deeper. It means a global system where conflicts still exist, but are resolved without violence, where power is not enforced through threat, but through cooperation, where survival is no longer tied to domination. This kind of peace has never existed in human history. Every civilization we know, ancient or modern, was built with violence embedded into its structure, borders enforced by force, resources protected by weapons, security defined by who can strike hardest. Even during so-called peaceful eras, nations were preparing for the next war. Weapons were upgraded. Armies were trained. Fear remained. True peace removes fear as the organizing principle of society. And that changes everything. Because fear is expensive. Fear requires armies. Fear requires surveillance. Fear requires prisons, walls, and constant readiness. In 2024, the global economic cost of violence, including military spending, internal security, incarceration, and conflict recovery, reached nearly $20 trillion per year. That is money not building schools, not curing diseases, not stabilizing the climate, not lifting people out of poverty. True world peace isn't just moral. It's the single largest economic opportunity humanity has ever ignored. And the moment violence is no longer the default solution, resources begin to move. Slowly at first, then all at once. But before we explore what that money could build, we need to understand something crucial. Peace doesn't fail because humans are violent. It fails because our systems reward violence. And once those systems change, human behavior follows. Which brings us to the first massive transformation a peaceful world would trigger: the global economy. Next, let's explore what happens when nearly $20 trillion a year is no longer spent on destruction, and where that money actually goes. We'll look at how global GDP would surge without raising taxes, why poverty could collapse faster than at any time in history, how education, healthcare, and infrastructure would transform overnight, and why peace might be the most profitable idea humanity has ever rejected. The global economic explosion of true world peace. If true world peace were achieved, the first shock wouldn't be emotional. It would be economic. Right now, humanity spends staggering amounts of money not to build the future, but to prevent destruction, recover from violence, and prepare for the next conflict. Wars don't just destroy cities. They distort entire economies. Military budgets consume national wealth. Insurance systems price in instability. Markets hesitate. Supply chains break. Investors pull back. Entire regions are written off as too risky. Violence acts like a permanent tax on human potential. And when violence disappears, that tax disappears with it. Today, the global economic cost of violence is estimated at nearly $20 trillion every single year. That includes military spending, internal security, incarceration, lost productivity, and reconstruction after conflict. That number is difficult to comprehend. To put it simply, it represents a massive hidden economy, one that produces no happiness, no progress, and no lasting value. In a peaceful world, that money doesn't vanish. It moves. And where it moves to reshapes everything. The first place it goes is human development. When nations no longer fear invasion, they no longer need to stockpile weapons or maintain massive standing armies. Budgets once locked into defense become flexible for the first time. Education systems expand. Healthcare systems modernize. Infrastructure projects that once seemed impossible suddenly become routine. Roads, bridges, water systems, and energy grids receive consistent investment instead of emergency repairs. The result isn't just better living standards. It's explosive economic growth. A peaceful world would see global GDP rise not because people work harder, but because resources stop being wasted. Entire industries currently built around conflict, weapons manufacturing, private security, war logistics, would shrink or transform. But the jobs wouldn't disappear. They would shift. Engineers who once designed weapons now design energy systems. Logistics experts who moved military supplies now optimize global food distribution. Scientists funded for defense research redirect their work toward medicine, climate stability, and space exploration. This is not economic collapse. It's economic liberation. One of the greatest myths about peace is that it would slow innovation. The opposite is true. War accelerates some technologies, but at a terrible cost. Peace accelerates all technologies, without destruction. In a peaceful world, international trade flourishes. Borders still exist, but fear-driven protectionism fades. Nations trade based on efficiency and cooperation instead of geopolitical rivalry. Shipping lanes stay open. Markets stabilize. Long-term planning becomes possible. When businesses no longer worry about sanctions, blockades, or sudden wars, investment becomes patient instead of reactive. And patient investment builds durable prosperity. This is especially transformative for developing nations. Many countries remain poor not because they lack talent or resources, but because instability scares away capital. Peace removes that barrier. Once safety is guaranteed, investment flows where it was once blocked. Local industries grow. Regional trade networks strengthen. Poverty doesn't just decline, it collapses. Because poverty thrives in chaos. In a peaceful world, governments also save enormous amounts on emergency spending. Disaster relief becomes proactive instead of reactive. Healthcare systems focus on prevention rather than crisis response. Economic shocks become manageable instead of devastating. The global economy becomes resilient. But the most radical shift isn't money. It's time. When societies are no longer preparing for war, they plan decades ahead instead of election cycles. This allows for long-term projects humanity has always postponed. Global renewable energy grids. Universal access to clean water. Massive climate repair initiatives. Planet-scale scientific collaboration. Problems that once seemed unsolvable suddenly become manageable because they finally receive sustained attention. Even inequality begins to change. True peace requires justice, and justice requires fairness. In a peaceful system, wealth concentration driven by conflict loses its power. War economies reward a small elite. Peace economies reward participation. As education spreads and opportunity expands, inequality narrows not through force, but through access. This creates a positive feedback loop. Healthier people are more productive. Educated people innovate faster. Stable societies grow wealthier. And wealth stops being something nations fight over and becomes something they grow together. Of course, this transition wouldn't happen overnight. Some industries would resist. Some elites would lose power. Some governments would struggle to adapt. But the long-term direction is clear. Peace doesn't weaken economies. It unleashes them. And once the economic pressure of violence is removed, the effects spill directly into everyday human life. Because money shapes how people live. And in the next part, we'll explore what true world peace would mean not for nations, but for you. How it would change daily life, mental health, freedom, human relationships, and why a peaceful world might feel so unfamiliar that many people wouldn't recognize it at first. We'll explore how true world peace transforms daily human experience. What life feels like without constant background fear. How mental health changes when violence disappears. Why freedom expands in ways we rarely imagine. And how human relationships evolve in a world built on trust instead of threat. How true world peace would transform daily human life. The biggest change true world peace would bring wouldn't happen in governments or economies. It would happen inside people. Right now, even in countries that aren't at war, human life is shaped by an invisible background pressure. A constant sense that something could go wrong. That instability is always nearby. That safety is temporary. This pressure affects how people think, plan, and behave, often without realizing it. True world peace removes that background fear. And when fear disappears, daily life changes in ways that are subtle at first, then profound. The most immediate change would be psychological. Millions of people around the world live with conflict-related anxiety, even if they've never experienced war directly. News cycles, political threats, economic instability, and social tension all feed a low-level stress that never fully turns off. In a peaceful world, that noise fades. People wake up without the subconscious fear of sudden disruption. They plan years ahead instead of weeks. They make decisions based on growth rather than survival. This alone dramatically improves mental health. Rates of anxiety and depression drop. Stress-related illnesses decline. Burnout becomes less common. Not because life becomes perfect, but because it becomes predictable. Predictability is one of the greatest sources of psychological safety. When people feel safe, they take creative risks. They invest in relationships. They pursue education later in life. They start businesses without fear of collapse. Children grow up without absorbing fear from adults. Parents raise families without constant stress about safety or displacement. And this changes how entire generations develop. Another major shift is freedom of movement. In a peaceful world, borders still exist, but fear-based restrictions loosen. Travel becomes normal, not exceptional. Migration becomes cooperative, not desperate. People move for opportunity instead of survival. This reshapes cities. Urban areas become more diverse, not because of crisis, but because of choice. Cultures mix naturally. Ideas spread faster. And when people interact regularly across cultures, empathy grows. Peace doesn't make everyone agree. It makes disagreement safer. In a peaceful society, conflict doesn't disappear, it transforms. Instead of being solved with force, conflicts are handled through negotiation, mediation, and shared incentives. This changes human behavior at every level. Workplaces become less hostile. Politics becomes less performative. Communities become more resilient. When violence is not an option, cooperation becomes the default. And this spills into everyday interactions. Road rage decreases. Aggression declines. Trust increases. People become less defensive because they no longer feel constantly threatened. This also reshapes how societies handle justice. In a peaceful world, justice systems focus on restoration instead of punishment. Prisons shrink. Rehabilitation expands. Crime drops, not because of fear, but because opportunity increases. Most crime is driven by desperation, inequality, and instability. Remove those pressures, and crime loses its fuel. That doesn't mean crime disappears, but it becomes manageable rather than overwhelming. Another profound shift is time. Right now, much of human life is rushed. People work longer hours because they fear falling behind. They save obsessively because they fear collapse. They sacrifice health because they fear insecurity. In a peaceful world, the pace of life slows. Not because people stop working, but because survival is no longer urgent. Work becomes purposeful instead of frantic. Careers become flexible. Education becomes lifelong rather than front-loaded. People change careers without stigma. Take breaks without guilt. Redefine success beyond accumulation. This has enormous effects on creativity. Artists create without censorship driven by fear. Writers explore ideas without political pressure. Scientists collaborate across borders without restriction. Human expression flourishes. Culture becomes richer, not louder. Music, literature, philosophy, and art reflect curiosity instead of trauma. And this changes identity. People stop defining themselves primarily by nationality, ideology, or opposition. They define themselves by values, interests, and contributions. This doesn't erase culture. It deepens it. Local traditions thrive because they are no longer threatened. Global culture expands because it's no longer imposed. Even relationships change. Romantic partnerships become more stable. Families become healthier. Communities rebuild trust. Because trust is easier when violence is gone. Perhaps the most underrated change is how children grow up. Children in a peaceful world are not trained to fear. They are not taught to see outsiders as threats. They are not conditioned to accept violence as normal. Instead, they learn collaboration early. They grow up solving problems instead of avoiding them. This creates adults who are emotionally resilient, socially skilled, and less reactive. And that might be the greatest transformation of all. Because peace doesn't just change the world once. It compounds across generations. But there's another dimension of peace that reaches beyond psychology and society. It reaches into technology itself. Because right now, some of humanity's greatest minds are focused on one thing: staying ahead of threats. What happens when that focus disappears? That's where the next transformation begins. In the next chapter, we'll explore how true world peace unleashes technology, science, and human potential. What happens when military research shifts to human advancement? How fast breakthroughs accelerate without secrecy and rivalry? Why climate repair, disease prevention, and space exploration explode forward? And how humanity's greatest problems finally become solvable. Technology, science, and human potential in a peaceful world. Right now, some of the smartest people on Earth are working on a single problem: how to outpace a threat, how to detect an enemy first, how to strike faster, how to defend against the next weapon. Entire scientific careers are built around anticipation of violence. In a truly peaceful world, that pressure disappears. And when it does, the direction of human intelligence changes completely. The first major shift happens in research priorities. Today, enormous portions of global research funding are tied to defense. Advanced materials, artificial intelligence, aerospace engineering, cybersecurity, and energy research often exist inside military pipelines. This doesn't mean those technologies are evil. It means they are constrained. They are developed in secrecy. They are siloed. They are optimized for conflict, not for human benefit. In a peaceful world, secrecy becomes unnecessary. Knowledge flows freely. Scientists collaborate across borders without fear of espionage or intellectual theft. Research labs share data openly. Discoveries spread instantly instead of being locked behind classification systems. This accelerates progress in ways that are difficult to overstate. Breakthroughs that once took decades happen in years. Technologies that stalled due to lack of funding suddenly surge forward. Ideas once dismissed as too risky receive serious attention. One of the biggest beneficiaries is medicine. Right now, medical research is fragmented. Countries compete. Companies protect patents aggressively. Access to treatments is unequal. In a peaceful world, healthcare becomes a global project. Disease doesn't respect borders, and without political rivalry, neither does research. Global disease surveillance improves. Preventive care expands. Chronic illnesses receive sustained attention. Instead of racing to treat symptoms, science focuses on root causes. Mental health becomes a priority instead of an afterthought. Aging research accelerates. Preventable diseases decline rapidly. Healthcare systems stop operating in crisis mode and begin operating in optimization mode. The result is not immortality, but healthier, longer, more productive lives. Another major leap happens in energy. Energy scarcity is one of the quiet drivers of conflict. Control energy, and you control economies. In a peaceful world, energy stops being a weapon. Massive investment flows into renewable infrastructure. Solar, wind, geothermal, tidal, and next-generation storage technologies scale rapidly. Instead of competing for fossil resources, nations cooperate on energy abundance. Energy grids become global and resilient. Remote regions gain access to power. Energy poverty disappears. This alone reshapes geopolitics. When energy is abundant and clean, entire categories of conflict vanish. And with abundant energy comes another transformation: automation. In today's world, automation is feared. People worry about job loss, inequality, and displacement. In a peaceful world with strong social systems, automation becomes liberating. Machines handle dangerous, repetitive, and exhausting work. Humans focus on creativity, care, strategy, and innovation. Work becomes more meaningful. People work fewer hours without losing dignity. Productivity increases without exploitation. Human labor shifts toward what humans do best. This frees time. And time is the most valuable resource of all. With time, people learn more. They create more. They connect more. Education transforms completely. Instead of front-loading learning into childhood, education becomes lifelong. People retrain throughout their lives without stigma. Knowledge updates constantly. Curiosity becomes normal. Universities become global networks instead of gatekeepers. Learning is open, accessible, and continuous. And this leads to one of the most exciting shifts of all: space exploration. War has always limited humanity's reach. Space programs are expensive, politically sensitive, and often framed as strategic competitions. In a peaceful world, space becomes cooperative. Shared missions replace rival programs. Resources are pooled. Risks are shared. Humanity returns to the moon. Together, Mars becomes a collaborative project, not a race. Space infrastructure expands sustainably. Asteroid mining becomes feasible. Planetary defense becomes coordinated. Scientific discovery accelerates. Space stops being a symbol of dominance and becomes a shared frontier. Even artificial intelligence changes direction. Right now, AI development is heavily influenced by surveillance, military use, and competitive advantage. In a peaceful world, AI is optimized for human well-being. It assists doctors instead of replacing them, supports teachers instead of monitoring students, enhances creativity instead of manipulating attention. AI becomes a partner rather than a threat. And with all these advances, something remarkable happens. Human potential expands. Not because people become smarter, but because barriers are removed. When fear disappears, creativity flourishes. When survival is secure, innovation accelerates. When cooperation replaces competition, progress compounds. Humanity stops reacting and starts designing. Designing better cities, better systems, better lives. But there is one system that has suffered more from war than any other, the planet itself. And even the most advanced technology cannot matter if the environment collapses. Which brings us to the next transformation. Because true peace doesn't just change human systems. It allows the Earth to heal. Next, we'll explore how true world peace transforms the environment and the planet itself. How wars have damaged ecosystems, and what happens when they stop. Why peace is essential for solving climate change. How conservation, restoration, and sustainability finally become possible. And what a healed planet actually looks like. Environmental restoration and a healed planet. If war has one silent victim, it's the Earth itself. Long after battles end and borders are redrawn, the damage remains. Burned forests, poisoned water, scarred land, unexploded weapons buried beneath soil. Entire ecosystems disrupted or erased. War doesn't just kill people. It wounds the planet. In a truly peaceful world, that damage finally stops accumulating. And for the first time in human history, the Earth gets something it has never had before. Time. Right now, environmental protection always competes with urgency. Governments delay climate action because of security concerns. Conservation budgets are slashed in favor of defense. Environmental treaties collapse under geopolitical tension. Peace removes that competition. When nations no longer fear each other, environmental survival becomes a shared priority instead of a bargaining chip. The first major change happens in land use. Military zones cover enormous portions of the planet. Training grounds, testing sites, buffer zones, and restricted areas occupy forests, deserts, coastlines, and oceans. In a peaceful world, many of these areas are decommissioned. Some are returned to nature. Some become protected reserves. Some are rehabilitated and restored. Former battlefields slowly regenerate. Minefields are cleared permanently. Toxic sites are cleaned instead of ignored. This isn't just symbolic. It restores biodiversity on a massive scale. Species that were pushed to the edge begin to recover. Migration corridors reopen. Ecosystems reconnect. And once ecosystems reconnect, they become resilient again. Oceans experience one of the most dramatic changes. Naval warfare, sonar testing, and military pollution have quietly damaged marine life for decades. Noise disrupts whale navigation. Fuel spills poison reefs. Overfishing is often tied to illegal, militarized enforcement. In a peaceful world, oceans become cooperative zones. Fishing becomes regulated globally instead of competitively. Conservation agreements are enforced through trust instead of force. Marine protected areas expand. Fish stocks recover. Coral reefs stabilize. Ocean ecosystems begin functioning as climate regulators again. This has a direct effect on climate change. Right now, climate action is slowed by rivalry. Countries hesitate to reduce emissions if competitors don't do the same. Energy transitions are delayed because of national security concerns. Peace removes that hesitation. Climate change becomes a technical problem, not a political weapon. Nations coordinate emission reductions instead of arguing over responsibility. Carbon pricing becomes global. Renewable energy deployment accelerates. Massive reforestation projects begin, not as gestures, but as coordinated planetary repair. Deserts are stabilized. Wetlands are restored. Carbon sinks expand. The planet's natural systems begin absorbing damage instead of amplifying it. Air quality improves rapidly. Military activity produces enormous emissions from aircraft, vehicles, logistics, and infrastructure. Removing that alone reduces pollution significantly. Cities become cleaner. Respiratory illnesses decline. Urban environments become livable. Water systems also recover. War contaminates rivers, groundwater, and coastlines. Peace allows for long-term water management. Shared river systems are governed cooperatively. Dams are managed for sustainability instead of leverage. Desalination and purification technologies expand. Access to clean water becomes universal, not because it's easy, but because it's prioritized. Environmental justice becomes possible. Many of the worst environmental harms fall on the poorest communities, often those already destabilized by conflict. In a peaceful world, environmental repair includes people. Communities displaced by war return home. Indigenous land rights are restored. Local stewardship replaces exploitation. People stop treating land as territory and start treating it as home. This cultural shift matters as much as any technology. Because the environment doesn't just heal through policy. It heals through relationship. In a peaceful world, humans stop seeing themselves as conquerors of nature and start seeing themselves as participants in it. Architecture changes. Cities grow vertically and efficiently instead of sprawling destructively. Green spaces expand. Transportation becomes clean and integrated. Urban heat islands shrink. Food systems localize. Waste cycles close. Sustainability stops being a trend and becomes the default. Even agriculture transforms. Industrial farming driven by scarcity gives way to regenerative practices. Soil health becomes a priority. Food production stabilizes. Hunger declines not because of charity, but because systems are resilient. And perhaps most importantly, environmental decisions become long-term. War forces short-term thinking. Peace allows planning for generations. Projects are evaluated based on 50-year outcomes instead of quarterly profits. Environmental damage is prevented instead of repaired. The planet stops being treated as expendable. And slowly, something extraordinary happens. The Earth begins to recover faster than expected. Forests regenerate. Oceans rebound. Species adapt. Nature is resilient, if given a chance. But this transformation doesn't happen automatically. True peace requires more than stopping violence. It requires justice, equity, and cultural change. And that brings us to the human heart of peace. Because without fairness, peace doesn't last. In the next chapter, we'll explore how true world peace reshapes justice, equity, and human culture itself, and why peace without justice is only temporary. Next, we'll explore why peace requires fairness to survive, how inequality fuels conflict, and how peace reduces it, how culture, art, philosophy, and identity evolve without fear, and what kind of civilization humanity becomes when cooperation replaces domination. Justice, equity, and the cultural transformation of humanity. Peace cannot survive on silence alone. It cannot exist simply because weapons are put down or borders stop moving. For peace to last, it must be fair. Because inequality is the soil in which conflict grows. In a truly peaceful world, justice becomes more than punishment. It becomes balance. The first major transformation happens in how societies understand fairness. Right now, many systems reward power rather than contribution. Wealth accumulates not because of value creation, but because of leverage. Entire populations live with limited access to education, healthcare, or opportunity, often inherited rather than chosen. Peace exposes these imbalances. When war disappears as a distraction, inequality becomes impossible to ignore. And for the first time, humanity has the space to address it seriously. This doesn't mean everyone becomes equal. It means everyone becomes included. Access to education expands globally. Not just basic education, but advanced learning, technical skills, and creative development. Education stops being a privilege tied to geography or wealth. It becomes a universal investment. This changes everything. When people understand systems, they participate in them more effectively. Innovation spreads. Entrepreneurship grows in places once excluded. Economic mobility increases not through charity, but through access. Healthcare follows a similar path. Peace allows healthcare systems to focus on prevention instead of emergency response. Global standards emerge. Treatments are shared. Knowledge flows freely. A child's chance of survival no longer depends on where they are born. Justice systems also transform. In a peaceful world, justice moves away from punishment and toward restoration. Instead of asking how to punish wrongdoing, societies ask how to repair harm. Victims are centered. Rehabilitation replaces retribution. Communities heal instead of fracture. This reduces crime more effectively than fear ever could. Because fear creates resentment. Justice creates stability. Another deep shift happens in governance. When violence is no longer the ultimate authority, legitimacy becomes essential. Governments are held accountable not through threat, but through trust. Transparency increases. Corruption becomes harder to hide. Public participation expands. People feel ownership over institutions instead of alienation from them. And when people feel heard, extremism loses its appeal. Culturally, humanity undergoes a quiet revolution. Art no longer emerges primarily from trauma. Literature explores complexity instead of survival. Philosophy shifts from fear to meaning. Creativity flourishes because it's no longer censored by conflict. Cultural exchange accelerates. Music blends across continents. Stories travel freely. Traditions are preserved instead of erased. Cultural identity becomes something to share, not defend. This changes how people see others. Other nations stop being abstract enemies. They become collaborators, neighbors, partners. Stereotypes dissolve through contact. Empathy grows through familiarity. Fear fades through understanding. Even religion changes. Without political manipulation, faith becomes personal rather than weaponized. Spiritual traditions focus on compassion instead of division. Belief becomes a source of connection rather than conflict. Another transformation occurs in gender equality. Conflict disproportionately harms women and children. Peace allows societies to address systemic inequalities without crisis pressure. Women gain access to education and leadership roles globally. Gender-based violence declines. Families stabilize. This has enormous effects on development. When women thrive, entire societies thrive. And finally, there is a shift in values. In a peaceful world, success is redefined. It's no longer about domination, accumulation, or survival. It becomes about contribution, creativity, and care. People ask different questions. Not how do I win, but how do I help? Not what can I take, but what can I build? This cultural transformation doesn't erase human flaws. Greed still exists. Conflict still happens. Mistakes are still made. But the default response changes. Problems are solved instead of escalated. Differences are negotiated instead of attacked. Power is distributed instead of hoarded. Humanity matures. And when that happens, peace stops being an idea. It becomes a system. But even then, peace is not guaranteed forever. It must be maintained. And that raises the final question. What would it take to keep true world peace alive? Not for years, but for centuries. Lastly, we'll explore why peace is fragile without commitment. The systems required to maintain peace long-term. The risks that could bring conflict back. And the ultimate question of whether humanity is ready for peace. Can humanity sustain true world peace? The hardest part of peace is not achieving it. It's keeping it. History is filled with moments when humanity stood on the edge of stability, only to fall back into conflict. Treaties were signed. Wars ended. Promises were made. And yet, violence returned. So if true world peace were achieved, the most important question would not be how it began. It would be how it survives. The first truth about peace is that it is not passive. Peace is active. It requires constant maintenance, honest reflection, and systems designed to absorb tension before it turns into violence. Without those systems, peace erodes quietly, long before the first shot is fired. The foundation of lasting peace is trust. Not blind trust, but structured trust. Nations must believe that cooperation benefits them more than conflict. That belief must be reinforced not by ideology, but by evidence. Shared prosperity, reliable institutions, mutual accountability. When cooperation consistently delivers better outcomes than competition, peace becomes rational. One of the most important peacekeeping systems is conflict resolution infrastructure. In a peaceful world, disputes are inevitable. Resources still matter. Values still differ. Mistakes still happen. The difference is how those disputes are handled. Instead of escalation, societies invest in mediation. International conflict courts become powerful and respected. Regional councils resolve disputes before they spread. Economic penalties replace military threats. This requires patience and humility. It requires leaders willing to lose short-term prestige to protect long-term stability. Another critical system is economic inclusion. Peace cannot survive in a world where large populations feel left behind. Inequality is not just unfair, it is destabilizing. To maintain peace, economic systems must remain flexible and inclusive. When automation disrupts industries, societies must adapt quickly. When regions fall behind, investment must follow. If opportunity disappears, resentment fills the gap. Peace depends on opportunity. Education remains the long-term stabilizer. A population that understands history, systems, and critical thinking is harder to manipulate. Fear-based politics lose power when people can see through them. Education creates citizens rather than subjects. And citizens protect peace because they understand its cost. Another challenge is memory. Human beings forget pain faster than lessons. As generations pass without war, the urgency of peace can fade. People who have never experienced violence may underestimate its consequences. This is why historical memory matters. Peaceful societies must teach the reality of conflict honestly, not to glorify it, but to understand it. War museums exist not as monuments to victory, but as warnings. Stories are preserved. Testimonies are shared. History remains visible. Peace must be remembered to be protected. Technology also plays a double role. While it can enhance cooperation, it can also amplify division if misused. Information systems must be transparent. Algorithms must prioritize truth over outrage. Digital spaces must encourage dialogue rather than polarization. If technology becomes a weapon of manipulation, peace weakens. Governance must evolve alongside technology. Another threat to peace is complacency. When peace becomes normal, effort declines. Institutions weaken. Corruption grows. Accountability fades. This is when peace becomes fragile. The solution is participation. Peace survives when people feel responsible for it. Not just governments, but individuals. Communities that talk instead of isolate. Citizens who vote, engage, and question. Leaders who serve rather than dominate. Peace is not something handed down. It is something practiced. There will always be forces that benefit from conflict. Power thrives in chaos. Profit thrives in instability. Extremism thrives in fear. Peace must be strong enough to resist those forces. That strength doesn't come from weapons. It comes from resilience. From systems that adapt. From cultures that value empathy. From societies that correct themselves before breaking. The final truth is this. Peace is not the absence of human nature. It is the maturity of it. It is humanity choosing cooperation over conquest, curiosity over fear, and responsibility over domination. And the future of peace depends on one thing: whether humanity believes it deserves it. Because peace is possible, the systems exist, the resources exist, the knowledge exists. The question is not whether we can achieve true world peace. It is whether we are ready to protect it every day, together. Final question for the viewer. If true world peace became possible tomorrow, would humanity be strong enough to keep it? Or would we find a way to lose it again? Don't forget to subscribe on your way out. See you next video.